Hi friends, I welcome you to today's discussion pertaining to finance related current affairs for upcoming RBI Grade B examination. Now the topic which we are going to decode today, it relates to recent RBI circular pertaining to urban cooperative banks. So as we have seen, recently RBI has been pretty proactive in respect of urban cooperative banks for the obvious reasons. And now RBI has come up with a circular which talks about two things in relation to urban cooperative banks. One is the maximum limit on the advances limits on credit exposures to individual or to group of related borrowers, and the other one, it pertains to revised priority sector lending target for the urban cooperative banks. So let's decode this particular circular in the form of MCQs. So friends, now let's start discussion on some of the important MCQs which can be framed out of this particular topic. So let's start with the first question. Reserve Bank of India has recently revised exposure limits for urban cooperative banks to a single borrower and group of borrowers too. Options are 10% and 25% respectively of tier 1 capital, 15% and 35% of tier 1 capital, 15% and 20% of tier 1 capital, 15% and 25% of tier 1 capital, or none of the above. So friends, recently RBI has come up with the circular, and in this circular it has revised the exposure limits for urban cooperative banks to a single borrower and a group of borrowers to 15% and 25% respectively of tier 1 capital. So RBI wants that urban cooperative banks, they should not grant a large amount of loans to a single entity or to a group of connected parties. So it wants that the loan portfolio of the UCBs should be rather diversified. So it has been decided that the limit with regard to single borrower is going to be 15% of the tier 1 capital, and with regard to group of borrowers it is going to be 25% of the tier 1 capital. RBI had earlier permitted urban cooperative banks to have exposures up to 15% and 40% of their capital funds to a single borrower and group of borrowers respectively. So earlier these limits, they were 15% and 40%. Now they are 15% and 25% as per the revised exposure guidelines. Now the tier 1 capital as on 31st March of the preceding financial year shall be considered for fixing these limits. So friends, based on our discussion on the previous slide, we can easily answer that RBI has revised the exposure limits for urban cooperative banks for single borrower and group of borrowers to 15% and 25% respectively of the tier 1 capital. So answer here is going to be option number D. Next question. Reserve Bank of India has revised exposure limits for urban cooperative banks to a single borrower and a group of borrowers to 15% and 25% respectively of tier 1 capital. UCBs shall bring down their existing exposures which are in excess of the revised limits to within the aforesaid revised limits by. Options are 31st March 2021, 31st March 2022, 31st March 2023, or 31st March 2025, or none of the above. Now, if we talk about the applicability of the revised exposures, so the circular states that the revised exposure limits shall apply to all types of fresh exposures taken by the urban cooperative banks. So on all fresh loans, these exposure limits, they are going to be applicable. Now further, with regard to the existing exposures, the circular states that the UCBs shall bring down their existing exposures which are in excess of the revised limits to within the aforesaid revised limits by 31st March 2023. So if you have an existing exposure which exceeds the threshold requirements, that is 15% and 25%, so you have to reduce that particular amount, that particular percentage to within the prescribed limit by 31st March 2023. However, where the existing exposure comprises only term loans and non-fund based facilities with no further exposure shall be taken on such borrowers, these facility may be allowed to continue as per their respective repayment schedule or till maturity. So if you have only given term loans and some non-fund based facilities, then you can continue as per your repayment schedule till the maturity. So friends, as we've discussed on the previous slide, the UCBs which have their exposures above this particular revised limits, they have to bring it down to within the revised limits by 31st March 2023. So answer here is going to be option number C. Next question. As per recent RBI circular on urban cooperative banks, UCBs shall have at least dash of their aggregate loans and advances comprising loans of not more than rupees 25 lakh or 0.2% of their tier 1 capital, whichever is higher, subject to a maximum of rupees 1 crore per borrower or party. Options are 30%, 40%, 50%, 60% or none of the above. Now friends, the intention of this circular is manifold. It talks about many different points. It talks about exposure limits and it also talks about financial inclusion and it talks about priority sector lending. So this circular, it also states that urban cooperative banks shall have at least 50% of their aggregate loans and advances comprising loans of not more than rupees 25 lakh or 0.2% of their tier 1 capital, whichever is higher, subject to a maximum of rupees 1 crore per borrower or per party. So it says that the urban cooperative banks, they should grant their loans to maximum number of persons, and for this particular purpose, the quantum of the loan which can be granted to one borrower or one party has been fixed to maximum of rupees 1 crore to be computed as per the formula specified here. So this is a very interesting point which has been talked about in this circular, and in my opinion, this is going to be promoting financial inclusion because now many borrowers, they are going to get funds maybe of a smaller amount. So friends, based on our discussion on the previous slide, now we can easily answer this one, that UCBs shall have at least 50% of their loans and advances of not more than 25 lakh or 0.2% of tier 1 capital subject to maximum of 1 CR per party. So answer here is going to be option number C. Next question. In its revised priority sector lending circular for UCBs, RBI has decided that the overall priority sector lending target for UCBs shall stand increased to dash of their net bank credit. Options are 45%, 55%, 65%, 75% or none of the above. Now let's talk about the revised priority sector lending target for urban cooperative banks. Now in terms of the circular dated 10th May 2018, the overall priority sector lending target for urban cooperative banks, it stood at 40% of the net bank credit. Now on a review, RBI has decided that this target is to be revised. Urban cooperative banks, they have to play a more proactive role in upliftment of the different sections of the society. So it becomes imperative that we increase this limit of the priority sector lending contribution by the urban cooperative banks. So it has been decided that the overall priority sector lending target for urban cooperative banks shall now stand increased from 40% to 75% of the net bank credit. So an increase of 25% has been made here. Now this increase is not to be complied in just say 1 month, 2 months or 1 year. A proper milestone, a proper timeline has been specified for compliance of this new PSL target. The urban cooperative banks, they will be required to comply this target by 31st March 2024 in a phased manner. So friends, as we have discussed on the previous slide, the revised priority sector lending target for urban cooperative banks is now increased to 75% of the net bank credit. So answer here is going to be option number D. Next question. On a review, RBI has decided that the overall priority sector lending target for urban cooperative banks shall stand increased to 75% of the net bank credit. UCBs shall comply with the above target by. options are 31st March 2020, 31st March 2022, 31st March 2024, 31st March 2025, or none of the above. So friends, as we have already discussed in the explanation part of the previous question, that the UCBs shall have to comply with the revised priority sector lending target by 31st March 2024. So clearly the answer here is going to be option number C. So here we end this session. Thank you friends for watching this video and stay tuned for more updates.